The Wilds Files is an immigration law podcast. The content shared on this podcast is for informational purposes only and does not constitute legal advice. The views expressed by the hosts and guests are their own and do not necessarily reflect the opinions of any organization or law firm. Listeners should seek the counsel of a qualified attorney to address specific legal concerns. By listening, you acknowledge that the host and guests are not providing professional or personalized legal advice. Welcome to the Wilds Files. The files are open.
Hi, everybody, and welcome back to the Wilds Files, your go-to podcast for everything immigration law. I'm one of your hosts, Josh Wilds of Wilds and Weinberg, and we're very excited to open a new file for everybody today. Alec Nelson, an esteemed attorney from our litigation and family team, one of my favorite people in the office, and I'm just so happy that he's here. I love working with him, and I'm excited for everybody here to get to know him. Alec, before we jump into it, and we're going to be talking a lot about your experiences in nonprofit, working in the firm here, a little bit about what you're doing now, and I think it's going to be a really good episode out there, especially for aspiring immigration lawyers. But before we get there, why don't you just tell us a little bit about yourself, maybe where you went to law school, your name, where you're from, some of your experiences, whatever floats your boat.
Yeah, well, first, thank you for those very kind words, Josh. That it's always nice to hear good feedback, especially when you've only been in a place for less than half a year. So always hearing good feedback is always good for the morale and also
and I mean it. I'm not just saying it out there, or it's not just coming out. Alec joined our law firm about 6 months ago, 7 months ago, maybe, give or take, and he's just been doing an incredible job at such a volatile time. With everything going on with the current climate and the administration and the way they're acting, you really need good lawyers, and you've been doing a great job. So. You deserve that feedback, and I mean every single thing that I say.
Well, thank you. I appreciated that. But back to what you were saying before, my name is Alec Nelson. I went to Brooklyn Law School. I graduated in May of 2019. Thankfully managed to do bar, graduation, all of that before the pandemic. I give a lot of credit to the kids that went through and did it in the pandemic. Yeah. I don't know how I would have handled it. So credit to all of them where credit is due. I'm originally from California. I grew up in Los Angeles, college in Northern California, and then I moved out east for law school, and then I bounced back and forth a little bit, and I've been back in New York for a little over a year now.
Do you miss Los Angeles?
At times, when it's 22 degrees outside like it is today, I certainly miss it, especially when I know that it's going to be 80 degrees in Los Angeles on Thursday.
Yeah, so that's hard to trade.
I miss it then.
Are you happy in New York, though? Do you like living in New York? These are two major cities across the United States. So I'm just genuinely curious.
Yeah.
Do you like one more than the other?
I think for my day-to-day life, I like New York City more.
Yeah.
I think that there are parts of LA that I miss and I like more. But for the most part, at least at this point in my life, New York is where I want to be. Right.
Yeah. I love the city and I love coming to the city. I live in Jersey now. But the city, depending on your point in life, is the best thing in the world.
Yeah.
Or it could be a really difficult place to be also, because it's very cutthroat. And but LA is an amazing place too. I've only actually been there once. I'm hoping to get out there again soon, but we'll see. Anyways, you mentioned Brooklyn Law School. You took the bar all of this pre-COVID. What states are you barred in?
I am just in New York.
In New York, okay. But in immigration, you can practice anywhere.
Yeah, so immigration law is federal, so as long as you're admitted, that's the most important thing. If you're admitted in multiple states, that's great. There are some aspects of immigration that do overlap with family court, so it might be better to be barred in that same state if you're going to be doing that type of work specifically, but it is not required. As long as you're good in the eyes of immigration, you're good for them.
Yeah, because like you mentioned, it's federal, which is great, and I think that's important for students to hear out there. And I think I may have mentioned this on a previous episode, but I just want to reiterate that we have some of our lawyers are barred all over the country. It really doesn't matter because you're practicing before federal authority. So the state authority doesn't matter as much unless you're bridging into those areas that Alec mentions, like family law or criminal law, and there's definitely overlap. But we stick in our lane. We only practice immigration, at least here within this firm. We try to be experts at what we do and not jack of all trades. But that's good. So New York doesn't really matter, but New York's a tough bar anyway. So congratulations on that. How did you get into immigration law? What first drew you to immigration law? Was there an experience in your past? Was it something in law school? Is it something you always wanted to do? Was there a specific moment that made you realize this is what I want to commit myself in my career to?
Yeah, I think like many individuals who go to law school, I was very idealistic and ran the I want to do human rights, I want to help people. And then the minute someone asks you, okay, what do you want to do with that? You go, I don't know. I know I want to help people. I know I want to do something, but I don't know what I want to do with it. And law school, it's okay to go into law school not knowing exactly what you want to do, because there's room to explore it. Some schools are more pigeonholed into very specific classes. The first year, some allow for, what's the word I'm looking for? For electives,
right.
To, kind of explore those, or you can explore those ideas in your internship. So your summer after your first year, 1L is your first year of law school. So you can explore after that, or during your second year, you can take clinics and to start exploring these ideas that you might be interested in if you don't already know 100% what you want to do. I was very lucky that during my second year of law school, I had a refugee law class with another associate, Victoria Phillips,
right.
who
another associate here at the firm.
Yeah, here at the firm, who had done an internship with the United Nations High Commissioner for Refugees. UNHCR. Yeah, and she did that in Malaysia. She spent a summer in Malaysia working with refugees. I learned about this through her. Our professor at the time is the one who had informed her about it the summer before. And so with both of them and some guidance from both of them, secured this internship in Malaysia and went and did that for 4 months. It was
in Malaysia. So you were in Malaysia for 4 months, living there.
Yep, I lived in Kuala Lumpur for 4 months.
Is that the capital?
I can't remember. I think it's the capital.
I don't want to embarrass either of us. It might be, it might not be. So I'm sorry for asking.
No, it's okay.
But in Malaysia for 4 months during law school, what was that like?
It was an experience. I think it also was an experience.
Right.
For good or bad, there was ups and downs. It was an incredibly rewarding summer. It also was a good notice for me that I was not ready to deploy abroad.
Right.
A lot of people are like, I want to work for the UN. I want to work in these hotbed areas. And this was a small fraction of what some of the really serious places could be. And after 4 months, I was ready to come home.
Yeah.
I missed my friends. I missed my family. I got, pretty sick at the end. And I was just ready to come home.
So you got a little taste of it, but it did open your eyes then to this immigration world to an extent, right?
Absolutely. It pretty much was, how do I do this kind of work
in the United States?
Yeah, back home.
Yeah.
And that's when it was like, okay, this is, immigration route. And so I pivoted. Thankfully, I pivoted, and I had time to do it because it was right before we had registration for classes. Mm-hmm. So I shifted all of my classes into the direction of immigration for my third year, and just kind of went with it in that direction from then.
That's good timing, and I guess never looked back, right? Because You've been doing it now for a bunch of years. And are you happy? Do you enjoy practicing immigration law?
I do. There are definitely ups and downs. It has its really tough moments. There have been times where I have thought about making a change. If I do it now, if I wait, will it be too late, or am I making a change too soon? And anytime I seem to think about it, something happens with the work that I'm doing that reminds me of why I'm doing the work and pulls me right back in, and then that thought just kind of goes away.
That's amazing. And I want to ask, and if you don't have it off the top of your head, that's fine. Maybe we could circle back. But is there a moment that you remember that you're able and ethically and confidentially able to share that brought you back in? Was it working with a specific client? Was it winning a specific case where you felt like you really made a difference in someone's life? Is there something that comes to mind?
Yeah, I think there's a couple, and without getting super into the details of them, because they are very personal and private, that happened to them, just a couple very sensitive cases at one of my previous jobs that I was at, where the person was so incredibly grateful for the work that it wasn't just me, it was really, there was a whole team of us, because I was doing the legal stuff, and then we had social workers that did all the other stuff, and they get as much credit as well, because we're not just the attorney, we're the therapist. But at the end of the day, you're their friend as well, because you might be the only person that they can talk to about the things that are happening in their lives. And there were just a handful of clients after some really heartbreaking things and really tough things that I personally don't know how they managed to get through it and continue to persevere and focus on themselves and their children and keep it all together, that they were just so incredibly grateful for afterwards, that it was like, this is why I'm doing this.
It's that moment of that moment of saving. I mean, you're saving people's lives to an extent. They can't go back to where they're from. Otherwise, they could be, in certain situations, could be subject to torture, being killed, being persecuted, whatever it may be. And that feeling that when you really protect them, it's like you're their guardian angel. I mean, that's an incredible feeling. So I understand why that would pull you back in for sure. You mentioned your previous jobs before you got to Wilds and Weinberg. Can you just tell us, were these, because I think it'll be useful for everybody to hear a little bit about, these were mostly nonprofits. That's where a lot of your experience lies. So if you're comfortable sharing which nonprofits you were, and if you could just walk us through what it looked like working at a nonprofit. What does that mean? What is a nonprofit? What do you do in a nonprofit that's different from working in, let's say, a regular or for-profit law firm? Did you enjoy it? Did you not enjoy it? Was it difficult? Just tell us a little bit about that.
Yeah, so I had a brief, short stay at a law firm right after law school, and then when the pandemic hit, there was just a lot of shuffling going on in the world.
Yeah.
At that time, I moved back to Los Angeles, thinking that, this will be in a couple of months. I'll stay here. I'll come back to New York. That didn't happen. I was very grateful and lucky to find the nonprofit called Peace Over Violence in Los Angeles, that they pretty much all of the work is with survivors of domestic violence, sexual assault, and interpersonal crimes. And that's they receive money through federal grants, state grants, city grants, and so that is the entire clientele. And there's very specific immigration relief for individuals who have gone through things like that. I also spent a little bit of time at Catholic Charities and International Rescue Committee. Working at a nonprofit, the day-to-day and the actual work is not too different.
Right.
We're working on cases where they're filing things, or we're helping them prepare for a defensive, in court. There are, rather than billing clients, you often are, having to take their information and generate reports, although usually one person does the report writing, and giving it to the fund, the people who write the grants and provide the money, because they do it for their information. So it's very hands-off in that way. But you do have to often, go through clients about what are their household sizes, what is their income, because that may, if they make too much money, they might be outside of the scope of what that specific grant is. The nice thing is that often you are not just single funded. You might have multiple grants.
Right.
So if you can't capture one client
Maybe
under a
they'll fit
certain
into
grant,
another one.
you might be able to get them into another. Or
Yeah.
some grants are giving, a grantor might be giving money for one specific type of relief.
Right.
But the client is eligible for something else. So maybe you have one grant that's for X applications, but we have another grant over here that doesn't care. So we can capture them this way. So you're finding ways to capture people into being able to give them services.
Yeah, that I didn't know about that, so I think that's amazing. And I think the most important part about that is that they're not pigeonholed into, you're not pigeonholed into doing just one thing. If there are multiple grants for multiple forms of relief, because someone could come to you and they might be eligible. You think they're eligible for asylum, but then really it's a VAWA claim, which is the Violence Against Women's Act. Or maybe they're eligible for some sort of non-immigrant visa, and I know nonprofits don't focus too much on that. But that's great. Did you find though that at nonprofits the resources were more limited? Like or is it the same and it's just a different type of clientele?
I think it depends on the nonprofit and where their funding source is coming from. Some nonprofits are much bigger and have much deeper wells of resources that they're tapping into, and some are smaller and they're constantly fighting for their own funding, having to do the work to search it out for themselves. So I think it really depends. Some of the financial constraints might be that you're at a nonprofit that doesn't have the capacity, whether it's because your team is so small or you just have so many cases where you can't do everything.
Yeah.
You have to make the decisions of what we are and we aren't going to do. And that was a conversation that I've had as part of a team before in the past, is like, what do we really want to focus on and what is our goal and objective here? And, if we can find more money, what are other things that we would like to try and do, but taking into account what we can do and what we for sure have funding for, throwing it as much as we can at a certain type of thing.
Were there ever times, and I'm curious about this, were there ever times where there was someone that you wanted to help, but they didn't fall into one of those specific grants? And how did you like deal with that on a psychological and emotional level?
Yeah, it's tough because that definitely happens. one of the great things is that there are so many nonprofits out there, so that if you or we could not help someone, our next best thing was to give them referrals. And not just to one, it's like we're providing you a list of referrals that we trust. Because there's many places that people can go where they might not get the best help, or help that you're like, this is a little questionable. So we're pushing them in the direction of the places we know and we trust, that we know will give them good support. And for yourself, you just have to know that you have done everything that you could do. You would like to do more if you could, but you can't. You just have to compartmentalize that a little bit.
Yeah, right. You have to keep things in line, and because you have to work within the boundaries that you're given. And I know nowadays the nonprofit world has changed tremendously. A lot of them lost all of their funding and have shut down, and it's a shame, because a lot of these people who really need lawyers and need help, now they can't get it. And putting that to the side for a moment, and that's obviously tremendously catastrophic, but there were some really talented lawyers, perhaps similar to a lot of people you may have worked with, who lost their jobs, and that they were getting paid salaries to provide for their families, and it's pretty crazy that happened. There's no right to an immigration lawyer. There's no right to a lawyer in immigration court, and I think that's a common misconception that people have. Like in criminal court, you can get a public defender. You get somebody to represent you. In immigration court, you do not have the right to an attorney. So either you afford one, or you get someone from nonprofit. If you take out that second option and you can't afford one, you're going in there alone. Yeah, and there's nothing. And it's often a David versus Goliath battle when you're in immigration court, especially if you don't understand anything. I mean, you're going up against ICE prosecutors and assistant chief counsels who this is what they're doing day in, day out. And if you have some people even with really good claims, because they don't have the nonprofit to back them, or they can't afford the lawyer, they're getting removed from this country, or they're sitting in detention for a long time, for a prolonged period. And it's unfortunate, because they don't deserve to be there. And you hear a lot about, like the Innocence Project. I don't know if you're familiar with that, but people who are wrongfully convicted for crimes. And when they get, that happens often in the immigrant world as well, where they're not necessarily being wrongfully convicted for a crime, but they're being wrongfully detained because they have an actual form of relief that allows them to be in this country legally. Obviously it's a case-by-case approach, and every individual needs to be looked at within that lens. But it's really, that's something that kind of upsets me a little bit, because there's really good people out there that lost their jobs on the lawyer side of things, and then really good people who aren't getting the help that they deserve. Another question I have for you about the nonprofit, and this kind of bridges into a little bit about what you do now, because we're often dealing with vulnerable individuals and vulnerable communities, but were you trained in a certain way at the nonprofits to deal with vulnerable individuals and sensitive topics? And if so, how do you do that? And how do you keep your own composure when you're hearing some of these really sad sob stories?
Yeah. So at Peace Over Violence, they had this incredible training that, in the moment while you're going through it, you're like, this is a lot. But part of what the organization did, I don't know if it's still going at this time, is that they used to operate a hotline.
Is that still around, by the way?
Yeah, the nonprofit is still there, yeah. And I keep in touch with my colleagues there. My former boss and I developed a good friendship, so we just check in every now and then just to see how things are doing.
Nice.
But there was a hotline. It was like a victim kind of response crisis hotline, essentially. And so every new hire, whether you're on legal, you're on the social worker team, whatever, has to go through that. And so it is an intensive training on how to process the information in as if you were the hotline responder. So if someone calls you and is like, X, Y, and Z is happening to me, I don't know what to do, I'm in an unsafe situation, They train you on how you're supposed to respond, processing the information, being there for the person, and then also how to give them the advice of like where they should go, whether it's to the police, to the hospital, to someone else, or like if they need advice. Like you're trained to give them enough, but then also in that you're making referrals. So that training was twice a week for 6 weeks, and it was all day, one day of the weekend, and then on Wednesday evenings for like 3 hours. Yeah. So it was about 10, 11 hours a week.
And you mentioned before it was a lot of domestic violence victims that you were dealing with,
Domestic violence, victims of crimes, mostly people seeking if they're eligible for U visas or not.
Right.
Domestic violence is not the only crime on that list, but that's how we would capture individuals. So most of our clientels If they were seeking a U visa, they were, domestic violence, sexual assault.
Right. So your people are calling you on this hotline from probably what might be some of the lowest points of their lives. They've been a victim of crime. They may have been physically beaten, mentally mentally, verbally, emotionally assaulted, or that's difficult. Those are we have conversations like that still here, obviously, and it's I'm so empathetic, and I think that's the biggest thing, is to be empathetic to people and just try to understand where they're coming from. It's very difficult to put ourselves in their shoes, but at least to understand the pain that might be going through. And I think having that type of training, I never got that type of training. For me, it was more of like going to the fire, but I'm a really good listener because of it. But I think having that type of training is great. So yeah, it might have been long days and long hours, but it was probably worth it.
There certainly were, but it was definitely worth it. I even going into that, I thought that I was good at, just kind of being a good listener and listening to people and being there for people. But that definitely helped even more so.
Yeah, and I think that's one of the most important things about what we do as immigration lawyers, is just making people feel confident and constantly showing up for them and just being available to them. We have to advocate zealously for our clients. There's no doubt about that. We have to do everything within our power and within the bounds of the law and the facts that we're given to advocate on their behalf. But a lot of it, sometimes, half the battle is just showing up. And I know nowadays, to kind of bridge into today, you're spending a lot of time going to interviews with clients, at USCIS, or doing bond hearings, or motion work, and individual master calendar hearings, and all these different things. So how are you able to help them, let's say, feel confident or feel ready within their own? I know you're their voice, right? Right. As the attorney, you're the agent for them. You're their voice. But how do you help them feel confident to find their own voice as well?
Yeah, I think part of it is it's developing a relationship sometimes with these clients quickly, and then really just kind of talking to them about it, giving them a real perspective, like insight of what, if they're going to an interview, what the interview is going to look like, what these questions, if they have problematic issues, what the questions are going to be coming at them. Because we know if a client has an arrest, we know that they're going to get asked about it. Right. There's certain questions that are going to come down the chain that we know that they're going to get asked. So giving them that advice and letting them know that there's more than likely a chance that you're going to be asked about this, and then working through, just point blank asking them, how would you respond if you were asked that? And then they give you a response, and you tell them that was a good response. Here's how we can improve it for the purposes of the interview. Right. Or they give you a bad response, and you kind of start from scratch, and you explain to them, like, I get it, I see why you would explain it that way, but this is how we want to kind of talk about it.
Which is a very difficult, so, as lawyers, we're not allowed to tell clients what to and what they can and cannot say. We can't put words in their mouth. Right. But we can help them explain their situation in a way that is both truthful and also helpful for them. You can explain that the sky is blue in multiple ways, depending on what, is it aqua blue? Is it navy blue? But at the end of the day, it's blue. So we're not, we're not putting, but it's kind of a weird example, but, that it's a difficult thing to do, to kind of coach them, let's say, a little bit.
Yeah, you're not making up an answer for them. You're just kind of saying, listening to what they're saying and saying, these are ways that we can change the delivery of this, essentially.
Exactly. So being as sorry, go ahead.
No.
So being as prepared as possible and helping them prepare as much as possible is a way to build confidence.
Yes, but also knowing their case and their facts builds their own confidence, because they then know that you are there as their backup. I wouldn't say it if it had only been mentioned once, but it has happened multiple times now where a client has said, like, oh, you're basically like the emotional support lawyer. Right. You're there to support us legally, but you also are there sitting in the corner, essentially carrying all of my stress. Yeah. And knowing that if I get stuck or I am struggling, that you are there to step in and support me. And I have to laugh because it's true. Yeah. We are there. Sometimes clients will start to answer something and they just get tripped up and they're nervous and they're stumbling over your words, and that's when you can just kind of step in and say, ask the officer, can we have a second, or can I explain for you, my client has told me this, they're struggling. Yeah. Officers, depending on how they are, they might say yes, they might say no, each one is different, but even just doing that sometimes to break the client so that they get 30 seconds to kind of pull themselves and rein them back in. If the officer says no, you can't, respectfully, counsel,
Right.
you need to not, I need to hear it from your client. That is enough time for them to kind of get back on the tracks and then answer it the way that they should.
Yeah, which they're allowed to do because, they're allowed to say no because it's the client, it's their story, it's their testimony, essentially. It's like taking testimony when you're at the interview. So a lawyer's job, it's kind of, sometimes I'm like a fly in the wall, or you're like a fly in the wall when you're at these interviews. Sometimes I go and I don't have to open my mouth, and those are ideal. And I'm there as an insurance policy for our clients and as an emotional support for them, but available to step in if I need to. But then there's other times where you have to advocate and you have to step in and protect your client's rights. And we don't let the ICE officers kind of bully us around, but we are at the mercy of the government to a certain extent, and we don't want to make things worse for them. I think a common misconception that people have is that a good lawyer is like a shark. They go in, they're ready to argue, that's just not true from my experience, especially having worked at the government. You want to kill these officers with kindness because they're people, and you want them to be responsive to you so that you can respond to them as well. I see a lot of people when I go to interviews, and I'm not sure if the same is for you, but I see a lot of lawyers, they go in there from other firms and they're ready to fight, and you could see it in their face and in their demeanor and in the way they're already talking to people when they're checking in, and it creates problems for the lawyer, and it creates problems for the clients, because then you have the officer is now, instead of on offense, they're also everybody's playing defense. Everybody's being defensive. Nobody's getting along. At the end of the day, our goal is to bring our client there and work with the officer so that the officer can make the officer's life easy so that they can give our client a green card. And a lot of times that's just, like you said, respectfully, officer, do you mind if I explain it? Officer, can they just have a moment? That's the best approach in my opinion. So I'm glad that you brought that up, because I think that's a huge misconception. People think of lawyering like, what's that show? Like Law and Order or Suits. Like you go in there and you argue. It's not the reality, especially in immigration.
No, sometimes you do get to do that when you're in court.
Yeah.
And it's fun to argue against the government sometimes, especially when you're right and and you're really strong in your conviction and your points, and sometimes that works.
Yeah.
But no, at the interview, especially for the interviews, I always tell clients, we do want to come in as kind and respectful as possible. And when I do feel like I need to say something, it usually is, if I may, or respectfully.
Yeah.
I'm not just jumping in, aggressively without giving the officer some sort of notice that I'm going to say something.
Yeah.
It also helps to be nice to the officer when you walk in, just saying, even be courteous, like, hi, thank you for your time, how are you? Just setting it on a neutral tone. These officers, sometimes they may be frustrating and they do things that you don't understand, but they're people following policy.
Yeah, I had an interview the other day, for example. It was a 7 a.m. interview in Newark, New Jersey, at the USCIS field office there. It was 7 a.m. The officer clearly did not have their coffee yet. If I don't have my coffee in the morning, I'm in a bad mood already. So if I'm in a bad mood and somebody comes in and they start arguing with me right away, I'm just going to be in even a worse mood. It's like telling somebody to relax when they're not actually relaxed. It's like the worst thing you can do. So I think, right from the beginning, being as kind as possible is crucial. And I'm glad that you brought up the difference between the interview and court. So when you're in actual court and you're making arguments against the assistant chief counsel and the ICE prosecutors with a judge in front of you, completely different situation, obviously, then you're making as many arguments as possible and you want to be as vocal as you can. But the interviews, it's really a case-by-case basis. Sometimes less is more, whereas in court, more is generally more. But, I'll caveat that, obviously, that it depends.
And I think there was, I can't remember what the subject matter for the interview was, but I remember there was one that I, mentally, I was like, I'm ready to fight. I know I'm going to get pushback on this. I felt like I was kind of that, and then the officer didn't make an issue of anything. And I'm like, great, now I came in on edge, ready to go, I didn't have to be. Yeah. So I was always prepared, but trying to just kind of ride that line.
Well, I think that's the most important thing, is just always being prepared and making sure that you fully understand and have a good grasp of the law, because the best approach that has at least worked for me and for my clients, and when I was working for the government, what I used to see is when lawyers would calmly go in And if they had to step in and explain a situation, they're explaining it very calmly. They're referencing the law, and they're able to explain it in a way that's simple and easy. Because a lot of these officers, the USCIS officers, they're not lawyers. They're just trained, and some of them are, but a lot of them are just trained to do what they're doing, and that's it. So they might not fully understand as much as we understand. So I think that having a good understanding of the statutes, the regulations, the case law, and the facts, and being able to apply it is absolutely crucial. I'm curious to know, because I think everybody is a little bit different, and maybe you used to be, but maybe you're not now, but do you ever get intimidated by any of the USCIS officers or the ICE prosecutors or the judge, and how do you deal with that intimidation? And I just want, most people, I'd say 99.9% of people in the world would be nervous in that situation when you're dealing with the government or a judge. It's scary.
Yeah.
So how do you deal with that?
I think at the beginning, I was nervous about the interviews when I, just going the first couple and then getting used to it. Now I'm not nervous about the interviews anymore, unless there is something that I know in a case I'm like, this could really be problematic. And even then, like, as long as I've done my prep and my research and I know, I don't feel nervous.
Right.
But at the beginning, yes, 100% I would feel nervous. You're going into a government building, you're talking to the government, and you also are kind of like, it's not even about you. It's about somebody else. So you're being responsible for somebody else, and you're nervous. And I think the nerves of something new, the nerves of the government, and you're responsible for somebody else, it all gets to you. Yeah. But as you do it more and more, you feel less nervous.
Yeah, and that makes sense. I used to get, you think of the government as this big bad bully sometimes. But it's like you said before, they're just people at the end of the day. And for me, it was eye-opening when I worked for the immigration courts, and I was working with immigration judges, and I was spending time socially with these judges, where I was able to realize that they are, a lot of them are very, very bright, and they understand things, and they have a lot of power in certain situations, but they're human beings at the end of the day. And they're there doing their job and advocating for whatever they're advocating for, the same way we're advocating for whatever we're advocating for. And I get nervous sometimes too. I think being nervous is good, because it means it forces you to, be even more ready. So instead of going 100%, you're going 110%, because you're nervous that something might come up, and you're reviewing the file the night before or the morning of, or you're quickly checking your notes and you're taking notes during the interview. I think that's a really good thing. And I think that when people lose their nerves and they're just kind of like, sitting back at the interview doing nothing, that's when you lose your true lawyering and your true instincts to really advocate for somebody.
Yeah. Court now is a completely different beast. And I still get a little bit nervous with court. I think court, it's just, we all have the concept in our mind that it is a judge. Yeah. And nobody wants to get yelled at by the judge. There's just this fear of getting yelled at by the judge. Thankfully, I have not had it happen to myself yet. Yeah. I know people who it has happened to. I have watched a judge yell at government attorneys. Yeah. My father is also an attorney, does not do immigration, but he's like, I've been yelled at by the judge before. I've watched other people happen. It just happens. Yeah. Like you might not file something the exact way that the judge wants to, and so they kind of yell at you about it, but you still did it, and that's just part of it. So I think the nerves of it also just, I think court might always have a little bit of nerves. I don't know if that's ever going to go away.
The stakes are so usually significantly higher too.
Yes, that too.
So when you're at a USCIS interview, it's your first bite at the apple. So if someone's applying for a green card, most of our cases are approved, not to pat ourselves on the back, but we're good at what we do. But if it weren't approved, then generally you get a second bite at the apple, which would be in court. And then that's the stakes are high. It's either yes or it's no, and you're potentially out of there, subject to appeals and other things, which we could talk about another time. But the stakes are higher. And everything you say in court is recorded and it's part of the transcript. And it goes as part of the record. Whereas at USCIS, at an interview, they're generally not recorded, and it's subject to certain states and what we call Stokes interviews, where things are recorded. But the stakes are much higher, so that it makes sense. But again, I think it's really good to be nervous, because it forces you to go above and beyond.
100%.
Yeah. So that's interviews in a nutshell. That's nonprofit in a nutshell. Just curious, what kind of advice you would have for young lawyers or aspiring lawyers who want to help people like you. You wake up one day, you go to law school just thinking, I want to help people, but I have no idea what the hell I'm doing or how to even do that. What kind of advice would you have? Would going nonprofit work? Are you enjoying working here in for-profit? Is it good to get a little bit of both? Whatever, now's your chance to share.
Yeah, I think that the first piece of advice, and I feel like I do sometimes go against the grain about this, is that it's okay, as I said before, it's okay to not know when you're going into law school, or even if at the end of your second year, you're still not sure 100% where you want to take it. Yeah. Did it put a little bit of extra pressure on me in my third year to kind of figure it out and figure out where I was going? It did, but I've landed on my feet and I'm very happy about it. So it's okay to not know for sure. I would say that if you do want to go into the nonprofit world, that it's likely going to be higher emotional burden. Mm-hmm. The workload is certainly there, but at least in my experience is that the people in the nonprofit world, they really are really emotionally invested in it. And maybe it's because the people that are coming to them are in such dire situations, and there's really little that they can do for themselves. Not to say that clients we have are not in terribly dire situations, but there's just something that's a little different when you have a single parent of 3 that's living below the poverty line, that can barely put food on the table for their family, coming to you that has gone through something horrific. It's just different. It weighs differently on you. And maybe it's because they see you in a different way than clients that have the means have a different way, that they are truly I am putting my entire life in your hands. And that weighs on you. You obviously want to do everything you can for them, but it weighs on you. So if you do want to go the nonprofit route, find a way to prioritize taking care of yourself. Self-care in the legal field is important in general, but I would say make sure, especially in the nonprofit world, to have that. A lot of nonprofits do have good work-life balances or other things to help offset that. I know one of mine, they had, for the whole organization, it was every other week there were in-house therapy sessions where anyone could come, talk about what was going on. It was an hour long.
You're talking about for you as the lawyers and the employees and the social workers?
Yeah, for the employees, because we had therapists in-house, that worked with clients. So there was in-house therapy once a week where it's if you wanted to come, you wanted to talk about something, it was in a group setting, but you could. And that was such a great thing to have, that I never did it, but knowing that it was there was really nice to know okay, if I need it, I have this option. I think, and if you're going nonprofit or private or government or whatever, it's just whatever you do, it's gonna be a lot of work. I think that there sometimes is the misconception that some lawyers don't do a lot of work, but it is a lot of work. And I personally, whether I get yelled at by my friends or my family, I used to not understand it with my father, constantly on the phone answering emails, but now I get it. You might ask a client to do something, and they might work the same hours as you, so the only time they can get to the thing that you've asked them is at 10 o'clock at night, and then you get that email at 10:30, and you're like, okay, do I answer this now? Do I wait till the next business day when I'm working? And usually the way I look at it is, does it benefit me and make my job easier to answer them now, even though I don't really want to? Or is it fine if I wait till the next day? Usually the answer is, if I just answer it now, it will make it easier.
Otherwise it piles up.
Some things, though, they come in and you're just that is something I can address tomorrow. But, there is no 9 to 5 as being an attorney. It is 24/7, 365, and that's just the way it is.
So I think some of the best advice that I ever got in terms of this work-life balance was, it was a guy named Jeremy. He was a finance guy, and someone asked him, how do you balance what you do? He had a family, kids, and was running a huge hedge fund. And he said that there's no work-life balance. There's no 60-40, 50-50, 70-30. It's wherever you are in the moment, it's 100. There's no, you're at work, you're giving 100%. You're focusing on your spouse or your kids, 100%. You're watching TV, give 100% to that show, because it's important to take a break also. And then if you need to pause the show to answer an email, 100% to the email. And I think that was just the best advice I got, is that no matter what you're doing at any time of the day, 100% focus on it. And it's a struggle that I have also, being married and having 2 kids with one on the way, trying to figure out get my head out of it and away from my phone a little bit. But I don't want things piling up. And our clients, we're dealing with people all over the world, so they'll call us at all times of the day. And my wife, thank God, respects that because she knows these people's lives are at stake. But it's also important to, like you said, take care of yourself and pull back and put your phone to the side a little bit and take a break. And hey, maybe that could wait until tomorrow. Maybe it's not an emergency. And I think that's something that's really important for people and we strive for here. There's a lot of firms where you'll get yelled at if you don't answer right away. A lot of my friends that work in big law, for example. But like we want you and we want everybody here to focus on themselves and take a break. And if it could wait till tomorrow, then that's okay too. Sometimes,
right.
But every time it's different, of course. So nonprofit, government, for-profit, whatever you do, taking care of yourself, understanding that it's going to be a lot of work, but really caring about what you're doing. That's the general advice that you'd give.
And
That's
try
great.
to have fun with it.
Yeah.
Like, I know it sounds crazy sometimes to think about it, but there are some cases where you go and you do it and you you go to court and you walk out and you're like, that was fun.
Yeah.
I had a good day today, Or you go to an interview that's going to be tough and you've prepped the client and you've got, you've got your stuff ready to go. And then, you do have to get involved and the client gets involved and there's a little bit of back and forth, but you walk out of there with an approval or whatever it is. And then you're like, that was a good day. I had fun doing it. So find the ways to have fun with it while also, making sure you get your work done and taking it seriously.
Yeah, that's really good advice. And just to finish off, because you mentioned this a couple of times about not knowing what you're doing, it's okay if you don't know. A lot of people 20, 30 years into their career still don't know. And that's one of the beauties about being a lawyer is that when you become a lawyer and you pass the bar and you're an attorney, it's important to focus on what you want to focus on. But in theory, you're not stuck doing one thing. You could do immigration today and tomorrow I can wake up and decide I want to do criminal law. Now, I might be committing malpractice if I just start representing people, but in theory, I could do that. And it's important sometimes, especially as a student, to realize what you don't want to do just as much as realizing what you do want to do. So taking those internships and those meetings and shadowing people and coffees and whatever it may be, even if you're not interested in it, because putting an X next to that field is just as important as putting a check.
Yeah. And the one other thing that I would also say is that you do not need to think that you're an expert at any time, but especially out of law school, especially in your first couple of years. You are learning something every day, whether it's today, learning of a new case that's specific to something that, reviewing and working on, or learning how to file a new type of form of relief, or ways to make an argument. You are constantly learning and growing, and that sometimes there's this expectation that you need to know everything when you come out. There's no questions about immigration on the bar exam. Not a single one on there. And I feel like I have learned more in practice than I did in class. And that's, I feel like, the way it goes for most fields.
Yeah, there's a saying in Hebrew, what's called Pirkei Avot. And I believe it's from Pirkei Avot. Please, no one out there test me or if I get the quote wrong. But in Hebrew, it says, Ezehu chacham milamed mikol adam. Who is a wise man? One who learns from everybody else. And I think that's a beautiful saying because you want to live your entire life trying to become wise and trying to become learned. And that involves learning. It's just learning every day, consuming. I know the sky's blue, but I'm going to ask you to make sure before I tell the immigration court that the sky's blue, because I want to make sure that you agree that the sky's blue. Maybe it's gray and it's raining outside, so you're going to teach me why it's gray. And I just think it's important to constantly be learning and asking questions. So great advice. Alec, thank you so much. This was awesome. Really appreciate your time. I know you got a lot to do. We appreciate everybody tuning in as well. We'll have Alec on again a couple of times. He did a great job, and we'll see you guys next time. This file is officially closed. Take care, everybody.